Hello, welcome to another Monday. It is January 30th, 2023. The person who's been in the news recently, who's really kind of touched my heart, is Priscilla Presley, who tragically lost her daughter to a heart attack earlier this month after losing her grandson 2 years ago to suicide. And so I've looked at Priscilla Presley's chart before. She's had a very extraordinary life. She started dating Elvis when she was just 14 years old. Moved with him to Graceland when she was 16. Would marry him, have a child by the time she was 23. And she writes in her book Elvis and Me that after Lisa Marie's birth, Elvis lost all interest in her sexually and had never really been faithful to her throughout their relationship, but kind of left her to fend for herself at Graceland while he toured and just had a life of a single man. And so she, at 23, had to kind of fight her way out of that whole trap that she was in. And eventually, by the time she reached her Saturn return, was able to separate from Elvis, eventually divorce him and start her own life. She did not just rest on her laurels, and just live off of the income that she got from her divorce settlement. She very quickly put that money to work. She started a clothing store in Los Angeles, which was very successful. She then would branch out into creating lines of luxury goods, home goods, and her own clothing line, which she sold through the Home Shopping Network. And she also built up, kind of a solid career as an actress at the same time. We know her from the Naked Gun movies. Those of you who are old enough to remember those movies. Dallas, you'd really have to be about my age to remember that show, but had a long running part in that show, which was very popular. So she's definitely had success on her own away from Elvis, but has always kept that name, Priscilla Presley. And we all always associate her with Elvis. And I think that was particularly important to her because Elvis would pass away when her daughter was just 9. And 2 years later, Elvis's father passed away, who was the kind of trustee of the estate Elvis left. And so Lisa Marie by then was 11. There was this, very famous person's estate left in the balance. And so Elvis's father made the decision that the person who could best protect Lisa Marie's inheritance would be her mother. And so Priscilla Presley became the trustee for the estate and quickly learned that things were in a shambles. Elvis had earned big money, but had squandered most of it. Of course, had disreputable business associates who'd taken a good portion of it. And so they were at the point where she was really going to have to sell Graceland. It was too expensive to maintain. The estate itself was worth less than $1 million. And so what she did was, she's already proven herself to be a very savvy businesswoman. She worked with a committee to turn Graceland into a tourist attraction and was, we all know, phenomenally successful. It earned back the money it needed to pay its taxes in just a few months and has gone on to be a multi-million-dollar earner for the estate. And she also worked with a very smart and savvy attorney or group of attorneys to trademark Elvis's name and create something called Elvis Presley Enterprises. So people that wanted to use Elvis's name would have to pay the estate for the right to do that because his name was trademarked. So by the time Lisa Marie got her full inheritance when she was 25 years old, that original $1 million was turned into an estate worth $100 million. So you can see that she was able to be kind of a mama bear in this role and really do the very best to leave Lisa Marie an amazing inheritance from her very famous father. We know also that she and Lisa Marie would have some famous clashes throughout the years. They were not always on the same page about things. And then, tragedy has really stepped into the life of their family. In 2020, Priscilla Presley's grandson, Lisa Marie's son, committed suicide at the age of 27. Lisa Marie went into a horrible tailspin from the grief of that, certainly understandably. And when she died a couple of years later, just a couple of weeks ago, she was pretty much a broken, grief-stricken mother and passed away from suffering from a heart attack. So, what in Priscilla Presley's chart would tell us about these kind of dramatic twists and turns in her life? We'll start, as we usually do, with the Hellenistic approach, where we're using just the 7 traditional planets. This is a timed chart, so we can use houses and angles. And the first thing, of course, we say, because she's noted today, Wikipedia said she's an actress and she's a businesswoman. She had 2 husbands. She's had 2 children. You can definitely see that Gemini sun influence in her life. And plus, she was someone who, that Gemini sun is ruled by Mercury, which is in Taurus, someone who's very good at merchandising. In Taurus, loved luxury goods, so that ability to promote her luxury goods and create her own private fortune from that is shown by that Gemini sun. But we also want to look at what I think is the most significant planet in her chart, and that is that Scorpio moon. And you think, well, why is that Scorpio moon, more important than being a Gemini or having a Taurus in its own dignity, Mars in its own dignity in Aries, as we see there, or Capricorn rising with Saturn close to the descendant? All those things are notable, but in her chart, she was born at night. Notice she was born at 10:40 p.m. when the sun was below the horizon. And so that makes the moon the primary light in our charts when we're born at night. Also, we know that she is really within 11 degrees of the MC. So you would consider that moon very close to one of the 4 significant angles in the chart. In fact, anything close to the ascendant and midheaven are considered to be of primary importance in the chart. So we've got this very dominant Scorpio moon. But notice also that that moon rules her chart ruler, which is Saturn. She's Capricorn rising. And so Saturn is in Cancer. So that becomes influential in guiding her chart ruler itself. And it's also interesting, isn't it, that she achieved worldwide fame. You think of that moon being up here with the midheaven through her marriage to Elvis. I think the story that Elvis finally got married went around the world. Back in the late 1960s. And so that Scorpio moon, though, we know the moon is in its fall. It's exalted in Taurus and its fall in Scorpio. And so what does a Scorpio moon signify? It's trying to do the things that the moon wants to do, but it's kind of overlooked and disregarded and not considered to be important. So there's sort of a futility in trying to meet your own emotional needs, but also trying to nurture others. It's always going to be a struggle with that Scorpio moon. And so we think about Priscilla Presley's childhood, and you kind of wonder, well, what about her own mother? What was the story there? Because the Scorpio moon could suggest some sort of an interruption, a difficulty that the mother had in nurturing you. And so we learned that Priscilla Presley was born in 1945. Her father was in the Army and died when she was 6 months old in a plane crash. He was flying back from Europe, where he had been serving in the Army at the end of World War II. And so, her mother experienced tragic loss. She was very young. And so Priscilla Presley kind of has that sort of shadow around the nurturing in her early life of her mother being widowed so young and with such a young child to take care of. But then her mother would also remarry a few years later and proceed to have 5 more children. And so, we can all put ourselves in Priscilla's place, that you are the single child in the family, and then all of a sudden, as the years go by, more and more nurseries are filled, and the mother's attention is drawn more towards other people, other children in the family. And so that's another sign of kind of an interruption in the nurturing and a difficulty around that, getting the nurturing she needed. Her stepfather would adopt her. He would consider her his own child, but yet she would always have that sense of being a bit of the odd man out in her own family. You know, she was the only one who had a different father from them. So that kind of sets the stage for that Scorpio moon. So she goes into this marriage with Elvis, you know, ruling that Saturn. And so Saturn in right here at the descendant would indicate some challenges around marriage. Because she was born at night, Saturn is what's called the malefic, contrary to sect. So Saturn's more problematic. So she married someone, obviously, who was quite a bit older than her, tried to control her. Probably that was part of the attraction for him. And so she, was left in the situation where he didn't really want her anymore, but yet she was expected to live in his house and care for his child. She did mention in her book, Elvis and Me, they did have a time early in their marriage before they had Lisa Marie when they were just by themselves for 2 weeks. And to her, that was absolute heaven because she could actually take care of Elvis, because otherwise he had a whole team of people to take care of him. And so that Scorpio moon here, wanting to nurture and care for someone, and that Saturn, that wall being put up, keeping her from being able to do so. And of course, that Saturn is even stronger because it's here with the North Node. And so we've got then Priscilla in this position where she's has to kind of fight her way out of this golden cage she's being kept in. And so that's when we can look at the ruler of this moon, which is that Mars in its own sign of Aries. And so even though she was very young, very helpless, she had an inner grit that would kind of help her confront the situation she was in and kind of fight her way out of it, assert her own independence and individuality. And it's kind of significant that she was studying karate with a karate instructor, during Elvis's long absences from Graceland, and eventually fell in love with him. And so started an affair with him that led eventually to their divorce. So I just think that's kind of interesting that Venus in Aries here with that Mars in Aries, that sort of karate instructor, is the one who's able to help her break free of the bonds that she's in. And so we've got then her set up now where she's on her own. She's, faced suddenly with the fact that Elvis has passed and Lisa Marie is really in need of someone to look after her inheritance. And so that's when we see that her kind of that Scorpio moon kicks in. This is something that she can do for Lisa Marie. She can protect Lisa Marie's inheritance. And so let's take a minute here and we will look at the chart with the outer planets and see what they add to the story. And so we'll go ahead and add in Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. There we go. And so what do they kind of add to this picture that we've created already? So we see, for example, that she's got Uranus here with that Gemini sun. So that adds some unpredictability, some maybe lightning striking in a bottle type of energy to her work with the different businesses that she would develop, that kind of entrepreneurial spirit. But also notice one thing that Scorpio moon that we want to keep focused on is in that 150-degree aspect, that quincunx to the moon. And so there's that instability added to the moon, that there could be crises, sixth house is house of crises around the moon. And certainly, her daughter losing her father at the age of 9, just as Priscilla had lost her own father young, kind of brings that energy back into her chart at that time. So that's one thing that we can look at in her chart. Also, we'll notice that Neptune is up here in her 10th house in exact trine to her sun. And so, when you think about someone who at the age of, early 20s became famous worldwide, is definitely shown here with that sun to that Neptune in the 10th house. Neptune in the 10th house can suggest fame, kind of your work going out into the masses, but also, her later success, that through her work, her 6th house efforts, she is able to create a brand, create a product for herself that's successful. Also, that through her work, she's able to do the same for Elvis's estate. But also notice that one thing that's in her chart that we see with that Uranus is that it's kind of in that averse aspect to Mercury. And we haven't really looked yet at that Mercury in her chart. It's in her 5th house, which would be the house of children. And so we see that it is an exact opposition to that Scorpio moon. So while she is working very hard to protect Lisa Marie and take care of her inheritance, note that there's kind of a conflict between, what the daughter thinks, Taurus, Mercury, somebody very stubborn and very fixed, ruled by Venus, which is next door in Aries, not really compatible, shows that she and her mother could be on very different pages about her inheritance. And that the one planet that really highlights that division between them is Pluto in the 8th house. And so we have mother and daughter here kind of fighting over inherited money. So I would imagine that was something kind of ongoing, especially once Lisa Marie inherited $100 million when she was 25 years old. And from reports now, it seems like things did not go well for her with all that money, and she was left in pretty difficult financial circumstances by the end of her life. And so that's kind of one thing that's very significant in the chart, how here's someone who's really trying, that moon in its fall, to nurture, to care for Lisa Marie. But it's almost like her efforts are being kind of bounced back at her, thrown back in her face, that whatever she tries isn't working. There's that kind of sense that I know what's best for you, and then your child saying, no, you don't know what's best for me. I know what's best for me. And this becomes a very difficult battle around the issue of inherited money. So we've got then this set up in her chart. And so we're looking at now the last couple of years, because kind of what was going on in Priscilla Presley's chart as she experienced these really devastating losses. So I am going to put up the chart with the day that her grandson committed suicide, so we can kind of see what's going on in Priscilla's chart at that time. Benjamin, I think at that point was 27 years old, had not, I think, had an easy time of it. A lot of stresses and strains in his life, and certainly in Lisa Marie's life. And so as we're looking at what was going on in the summer of 2020, I don't know if you all remember, we were still deep in COVID. We hadn't even gotten the vaccines yet. And Mars that summer was in Aries. It was a long Aries transit because it went retrograde. And it was in square to those Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, Capricorn planets. And so we see in Priscilla's chart that she was having that very profound stellium in her first house. For those of you who are Capricorn risings, you probably remember, as it being a very pivotal, transformational time, very heavy. Something pivoted that changed you forever, I would think, with that Pluto Saturn there in the first house. And so then what's going on at that time? But we've got Mars down here in Aries in her fourth house of family. So crisis, something very painful and difficult. Notice that Saturn and Chiron are together. Something very devastating, a break happening within the family is going to affect her profoundly. And so we know also that by derived houses, the grandchild is ruled by the ninth house ruler. That's the fifth from the fifth house. And so Mercury is the ruler of that chart. So you can see Mercury is here in Priscilla's fifth house natally, and transiting Uranus was passing over it. So again, bringing that crisis point to a grandchild. And so this was the beginning of a very difficult passage for their family. And we know that as Saturn moved into Aquarius in 2021 and 2022, that it would create a square to that Uranus. And so she was working with Uranus transiting through her fifth house and Saturn here in Aquarius, emphasizing that a child in crisis, so Lisa Marie in crisis, but as it transited through, setting off that Moon-Mercury opposition, both of them in square to Pluto, kind of creating a grand cross. And so that brings that Scorpio moon so back into prominence, where you can imagine that she's having a very difficult time trying to reach Lisa Marie, trying to help her, trying to comfort her, while at the same time grieving herself. So you can see that all of us experience that Saturn-Uranus square in different ways, but just that push-pull against the heavy responsibility and the just longing for some sort of freedom, some sort of breakthrough, some sort of improvement, some sort of moving forward. And so as much as we kept trying to move forward, there was Saturn in the superior position kind of holding us back. And so you can see that this would have been a very difficult time over the past couple of years for Priscilla Presley and her family. And then if we look at the aspects on January 12th, when Lisa Marie passed away from a heart attack, we just see some other things happening in the chart as well that indicate to us that this dynamic that Priscilla has in her chart of wanting to care, wanting to nurture, is really challenged and in a difficult position. We notice, first of all, that the nodal axis is right here on that Moon-Mercury opposition in her chart. And so this moon that so longs to nurture and care has that south node that's sort of washing away energy, taking away her ability to care and nurture her child. Fancifully, I kind of look at that north node on that Mercury as maybe kind of a liberation for Lisa Marie from her pain, especially since Uranus is there with it. I can only speculate about that. But you can see that T-square with Pluto is being emphasized by the nodal transit. And that's an aspect I've started paying more and more attention to. When the nodes cross our planets, it's usually a very significant time when those planets are expressing in some way. But notice also that the ruler of Priscilla's fifth house is Venus, and that Venus that same day is also creating a grand cross with opposing Pluto, squaring the moon, and squaring Mercury. So just, many signs that this was, extremely, extremely sad and difficult time for her, a time of unimaginable loss. I do like to look at positives, though, at the end of the chart and of my chart readings, and say, even though this is a difficult time, these aspects pass on. One thing that we do know is that Saturn, which is now towards the end of Aquarius, will be next month moving into Pisces. In fact, when Venus went into Pisces a few days ago, we had Priscilla Presley issued a public statement just thanking people for all the warm wishes and the care that they had extended and how healing that she had found that. So you can see that there's kind of a healing energy in this Pisces house in her chart, especially with Neptune there. Venus exalted in Pisces will ultimately be reaching Neptune. But we know too that Saturn in March is going into Pisces. And so Saturn is going to be eventually, not until 2024, but eventually it will be entrine to that moon. So my hope for Priscilla Presley is that she will find some peace in maybe sharing her story with others and having others share their story with her, just kind of finding that bonding, that community of people who know what it is to lose a child and just how devastating it is. And that possibly maybe creating some sort of fund, some sort of memorial to Lisa Marie. I could see that being very positive for her. So, we never get over the grief, but we somehow find that by holding the hands of others, we can move not away from it, but move forward with it. So that's kind of my hope for Priscilla Presley as the next years unfold. And then also, I wanted to close today by sharing something I looked at after Lisa Marie was laid to rest on Sunday. I just kind of wondered, she was brought back to Graceland and laid to rest next to her father and her son. And so I was just thinking, kind of what was going on in Elvis's chart on that day, because we know that our charts continue. We don't continue, but our charts do. And so I was looking at the comparison between what was going on in Elvis's chart on January 22nd when Lisa Marie was laid to rest. And of course, Chiron's always something that we look at in a chart. And we can see that, Chiron and Uranus are together in the chart. And also that we have, which is kind of startling to me, that Saturn return. We've got Venus and the moon working in concert. He's kind of having a Saturn return. Just a second here. I think I've got the wrong wheel up. Hold on just a second. Okay, so we've got Elvis Presley. And then there we go. Okay, so here is the Saturn return. And then also his chart is ruled by, his house of the child is ruled by Mars. And notice that in this chart, we have Chiron is opposite. Chiron in his house of children, opposite to that Mars. I don't really have my head completely around Chiron, but I just notice it in charts that are often profoundly sad. And so you just kind of see that while that Chiron going through his fifth house opposite the planet that rules his child, almost exactly. That's very fascinating. And that it's also happening at his third Saturn return, that his child is brought back to him and buried with him at Graceland. Sometimes astrology makes me cry a little. But in any case, thank you all very much for joining me for this look at Priscilla Presley's chart. And I certainly wish great healing to Priscilla and her family over these next few years. Thank you.